Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure, Navin.
Absolutely. It's a delight to be working with you after knowing you for so many years. Exciting day, launching the company and announcing a mega round.
Yeah, it's been a really fun ride. I want to thank you for your support. Obviously, you've been a critical part of both the company building and the financing effort, but a super exciting day.
So let's start with, what is Rhoda?
Rhoda is trying to solve what, in my view, is the biggest unsolved problem in technology, which is that artificial intelligence is poised to transform the world in the symbolic AI space, but the physical equivalent of that doesn't exist. AI is very intelligent in terms of being able to process words and images and videos, but if you ask an AI to move, for example, a chess piece, it can't do that. Last couple of years have seen literally billions of dollars being allocated to robotic ventures. Despite all that activity, we haven't seen today's robot AI models cross over from being able to do demos in a laboratory setting to being able to work in the real world.
So that's the big opportunity.
That's the opportunity.
What was the key insight that made you jump in?
First of all, on the technology side, we recognized that you needed a solution that could really cross the chasm, really is what it is, between the lab and the real world. Crossing that chasm requires an enormous amount of data without which you can't generalize. Basically, you have to be able to deal with a distribution shift. The distribution you see in the lab setting is typically very narrow and very controlled. In the real world, it's much messier. There's a lot more variation, a lot more diversity. Being able to deal with that requires generality. So that's one part of the problem. We thought there was an opportunity to solve that part. And the other part was on the customer side. We're seeing enormous pressures in terms of labor and labor force, issues and so on. Frankly, a lot of people don't want to do some of the jobs that need doing in the corporate setting. There's the classic saying about, work that's dull, dirty, or dangerous, right? Humans just don't want to do that kind of stuff, and they shouldn't have to. They should be able to use their, IQ for more creative stuff. So the confluence of that problem where you don't have enough workers for certain types of tasks, with the opportunity to technologically cross from lab to commercial, is what creates the opportunity.
Your wedges go after activities is what I've understood, which humans can't do or don't want to do.
Exactly.
So this fear of job displacement is not an issue. These jobs are just unfilled. And it's really AI augmenting what I do as a human.
100%. Either the jobs go unfilled, or a different way to think about it is we enable more productivity for the humans that are at that job. So, if you have a human with a pickaxe trying to dig up the ground versus a human with a backhoe, right? There's different levels of productivity you can get. And similarly here, if you have these, you can call them robots, you can call them mobile manipulators. Their purpose is to really help the humans doing those jobs, so you can produce more output with the given labor force that you have.
Got it. So let's go back. Serial entrepreneurship, 7th company. What drives you as a serial entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm lucky to have found something that really I love doing. And I shouldn't tell you this because you're on my board, but I would do this even if I wasn't getting paid. In the end, the beauty of entrepreneurship is, you get to conjure up some ideas on a whiteboard with a bunch of super smart people. And if you think carefully about it and assemble the right team and execute well, those ideas can leave the whiteboard and end up in the real world. And the impact you can have with that can be just incredible. In some cases, it can be mind-blowing. And in my view, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing something that came out of a whiteboard discussion turned into real products. You've seen this yourself because you're an entrepreneur as well. And I think that with every new company, there's an opportunity to take on bigger and bigger unsolved problems. And of the 7 companies I have been fortunate enough to be involved with, this one strikes me as as potentially the biggest.
And you have had like a couple of companies you took public, right?
Yeah, it's been a fun ride. So of the 6 companies prior to this, 2 went public or were acquired. If the team believes in the vision, joins the effort, puts in incredible hours, it's good to see some financial return for the team. But having said that, the people that I've been involved with have been people that are really motivated by the impact that they can make. And that's been, really more rewarding than even the financial return.
So how big is this? Because you're saying, right, like, is it in the same zone of trillions of dollars of opportunity?
There's no question it's trillions. I mean, you can count it different ways, but one way to count it would be to say, how much is spent every year on manual labor, for example. And the U.S., for example, alone, depending on how you count, spends between $4 to $5 trillion a year on manual labor. And that's just the U.S. If you look at it worldwide, it's more than double that. So we're talking about $10+ trillion. And really, in the end, what we're doing, this is the market for work, right? And it's just some people have argued, and I don't disagree, that it may be the biggest market ever, right?
And how do you pick, right, these going after the physical market? You could go after consumers with what's the hot word, humanoids, or you could go after real problems for enterprises and businesses, more industrial, logistics, manufacturing.
Yeah.
How are you picking which segment to go after?
On one hand, we talked about how this could be the biggest market ever, right? And to address that market, you want to be really a generalist robot that can do anything. But it's really important not to try to boil the ocean and try to go after that day one. You have to have an entry strategy where you pick a specific problem that you can actually solve with high confidence that someone is willing to pay for. And then once you solve that, the beauty of the space is that there's a data flywheel that gets started. So once you can deploy and perform tasks autonomously, then you start collecting data when you're in the field. That new data allows your models to get better, which then allows you to address a broader range of tasks more reliably. And you can basically expand the base of tasks that you address until eventually you end up being able to do the fully general tasks. But I think it would be a mistake to start with that. The strategy has to be one where you can't let your eyes get too big, and you have to be able to execute.
So you need a wedge.
That's right.
Focus.
So to answer your question, what we've done is we're taking an approach where we're focusing on problems in the manufacturing and logistics areas, which are problems that on one hand are relatively well-defined, on the other hand have too much variability and diversity to be addressed with either conventional programmed robots or the prevailing paradigm for robots today, which is the vision language action model, the VLA. Those models just don't have enough generality to be able to work in the real world. VLAs have shown some really interesting results in the lab setting. They can make coffee and fold T-shirts and so on. But when you try to take them into the real world, they tend to fail because that diversity, that distribution shift that occurs isn't enough to trip up the model. So we want to basically have this combination of a new model that can really deal with diversity and relatively well-defined environments where we can have a high confidence of actually addressing the problem.
So solve real problems, narrow the use case, and then keep getting better and better and better.
Precisely.
So one of the things, right, I love about the Rhoda team is the complementary expertise and the different backgrounds and experiences people have. And every time I look at a company you start, you just assemble stellar teams who are well-rounded in solving real problems, not just tech. So in this case, how did you go assemble the team?
The team is everything, right? As you know well, because you've been a phenomenal investor over the years. For the team, I think you need a few things. You need, obviously, the starting point is you need people that are smart. You need IQ points, but there's no shortage of IQ in Silicon Valley. You also need domain expertise. It's not enough to work with people that you know from a different industry. You have to be able to get people understand the industry you're going after. You need people that are team players that really are, not just prima donnas that are hard to work with. And you need people that can get results. You don't need just pure talkers or thinkers. You want people who can actually do the work. I was talking with a friend of mine who's in the faculty at Stanford, Gordon Bechstein, and we were discussing these ideas, and Gordon got excited and said he had a really world-class, one of his best students ever on the PhD side that he wanted to connect us with, and we connected, and basically that led to the founding of the core team. So we ended up with a interesting mix of people that have a lot of business experience and people that have a lot of depth in this particular space. And the combination, I think, is where the magic happens.
You have had the privilege of working with some of the best investors. So what do you look for in these early investors, right? Like, why are they important?
I think it's critical to have really great investors. And I think the best investors are those that share the mindset of wanting to create really long-term impact. What they're looking to do is make an impact. They want to really transform the way, obviously in a positive way. And so the things that they're drawn to tend to align well with the things that I'm drawn to, which is, how can we identify really big unsolved problems, leverage technology and world-class teams to address them, and address them in ways where we can build large self-sustaining businesses. Because in the end, if you can't build a profitable business, then it's not sustainable. And you're really just almost a charity. So we have to make sure that the problems we're solving aren't just academic, but are problems that, real people, real companies, want to pay for.
My belief is patience, perseverance is critical, but company building is a marathon. There's no overnight success.
100%.
Especially
100%.
when you're building hardware, you're building fundamental models. Just takes time.
Absolutely. I think a great example of that, that well, of course, is NVIDIA, right? Where they started out in one space, decades ago, and they had the hustle to be able to kind of, win in that particular space of graphics acceleration. And then from there, they moved into other spaces. They built out this great ecosystem with CUDA and the lock-in. And I think that those kinds of ecosystems take time to build.
So let me go a little bit deeper on the investors. What have you learned along the way? Should an entrepreneur be looking for in a board member?
What I found that works for me is to work with people that are passionate about the vision that we're going after. Because if they are believers in what you're doing, then I think it all comes together. There's one story that you might have heard. I was working with Vinod in one of my early companies, and there was an offer to buy out the company for $500 million. And the other investors on the board, would have they were getting a 10x return, so they were happy with that, and they wanted to sell the company. And Vinod, to his credit, tried to convince us not to sell because he was convinced that the company could build a really great independent company, and he took the trouble to come over on a weekend on a Saturday and try to pitch our management team on why we shouldn't sell. In the end, the team chose to sell, but the evidence that he was correct was that after the company was acquired, it went on to generate, literally billions in revenue and had a relatively sticky business model. So I think you can never know the hypotheticals, but I think my belief is he actually was right. But that's the kind of mindset that I think really differentiates the true company builders from kind of transactional investors. And what I look for is folks that really, have that company building mindset.
So let's switch gears and talk about company building. Mm-hmm. You've been doing it, and you've been part of the internet era, the cloud era, the energy tech era, mobile, and now it's the AI era. What's different this time around for company building? Is there something different on the speed of decision making?
Yeah. For all the time that I've been doing this over multiple decades, you need to have a big unsolved problem, because you can't build great companies in small spaces. You need to have a differentiated technology, because if you don't, then you're in a commodity business, and commodity businesses are very, very hard to protect in terms of margins and so on and so forth. You need to have a world-class team. By world-class, I truly mean world-class, meaning that you need to be able to put your founding team in front of the best CTOs of the best companies in that space, and they need to be able to hold their own. They can't be just people that you enjoy hanging out with or doing stuff with. They have to be truly world-class. And for the kind of companies I go after, which tend to be more B2B type companies, you want early customer validation to prove that what you're doing isn't just something that sounds good, but that real customers are excited enough before you've built it to where they want to help
like
you.
Design partners.
Design partners, effectively, right?
Yeah.
I have never seen a space with faster innovation than we're doing here. That's both good and bad. Our team can accomplish incredible amounts in a very short amount of time, but also means every week there's new papers coming out, new publications that sort of are starting to reduce the margin of lead that we have. And so it's both a very exciting thing and a bit scary, but you have to be willing to adopt that pace in order to survive in space.
So that's your recipe for finding product market fit. Get a customer as a design partner, understand their needs, and have the best team who can build for them.
Exactly. And I think in some ways finding that product market fit is almost harder than building the product. One test I use is when you approach a customer with an idea for a new product or a new concept, you can get one of three responses. First, they can say, nice idea, but we're not of interest, so we're not interested. That's not a good outcome. The second answer could be, they could say, well, this sounds pretty cool. Come back when you have a product and we'll be happy to test it for you. But what you really want is a third outcome. Third outcome is when they say, wow, this is so interesting to us. that, we want to help you bring it to market so we can get the benefits of deploying this in our environment.
Yep.
That's when you have something real. Is before you even built it, the customer, has this demand pull, and they want to help you get it to market. So instead of it being you trying to push something on them, you've got the demand pull. But you do need the discipline to be able to, if you don't get that kind of response, move on. Right? A lot of entrepreneurs kind of get stuck on an idea, and even if they're not seeing the kind of customer response, try to force it, and in my view, that's a dangerous kind of path.
Yep. Somebody was asking me, hey, how do you pick investments? If I had to summarize it, there has to be a market which is fundamentally needs to get reimagined.
Yeah.
And it has to be Mount Everest-like. Can't be a small hill going to like Stanford dish.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, it's not worth the squeeze. But then what matters most is the team.
Yeah.
They need to have the right persona, because teams build products, they build companies, 100%. And they need founder market fit to this.
100%.
And then if you have those two things, you really need differentiated technology.
Yes.
And you need real IP.
Perfect.
And if you have those three circles meeting, at the inception stage, you write a check and go for the ride.
Couldn't agree with you more. And this is why you've been so successful in your investing career. So.
Now, I've been backing great people like you guys who are climbing, and we are just the Sherpa helping you guys along the way. And hopefully, we are being a good Sherpa carrying your bags.
Well, you've been an amazing partner, so we're really delighted to be working with you.
Other companies I've seen in software go 1 to 10, but you're a systems guy, end-to-end thinker. You go 1 to 100. Right? Even in this company, and to go from 1 to 100 million, what's this playbook you use, right?
This opportunity is really tremendous, because you're right. Even with 1,000 robots, it's roughly $100 million a year. But the beauty of it is, as much as it's a lot of revenue for us, it's an equally compelling value proposition for the customer, because they're getting a lot more productivity out of these robots. And it's a big win for both sides. I think one philosophy we've used relative to just how we choose what to build or not build is sort of a two-step process, where step one is we only want to use our scarce dollars on problems that are not already solved by the market. If we can buy a solution, buy a component somewhere, we want to buy it instead of building it ourselves. But secondly, if we can't buy the component we need, we're not afraid to build it ourselves. Because the problem needs solving, and we have the confidence of being able to build world-class teams to go and address it. And in doing that, we end up finding ourselves building entire systems, not just one component, because whatever piece is missing has to get done. And systems tend to be bigger businesses than components.
So it's end-to-end thinking, systems thinking.
Exactly.
So reimagine things which are not solved, but then use what is standard.
Yeah.
And keep innovating.
Yeah. In the end, you have to basically, solve the whole problem. And if there's any piece of it that's not solved, it's going to impact your ability to grow. So if you think of it as a systems, from a systems perspective, then you can both solve the problem and build really large businesses.
8 billion people roughly on the planet. By the time this company grows, there'll be 9 or 10 billion people. You said 1,000 units from Rhoda is 100 million. 10,000 units is $1 billion. 100,000 units is 10 billion.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering.
And
right?
1 million out of 8 billion people using it.
Yeah.
I can't even calculate.
No,
it's like
the
100 billion in revenue, right?
Exactly.
So it seems, right? Like with less than 1% penetration, this TAM here is unimaginable.
This is exactly why, we think this is the largest unsolved problem in all of technology. The key, though, to crack that is you have to be able to work in the real world. It's not enough to do cool demos on, in a lab that are, in videos on the internet. And to cross that chasm really requires generality. And generality has been one of the thorniest problems in robotics. And we think the approach we're taking really addresses that. And in fact, we've shown that we can work in real production settings, which is kind of what unlocks that whole market. So it's a very, very exciting time for us.
So how are you thinking about the business model in a B2B setting for the kinds of products you're building?
The way to think about it for us is that companies, in order to produce output, need two main inputs. They need capital and they need labor, right? And those are the two components of GDP in general, right? And capital in some ways is unconstrained. You can just apply more dollars and get more capital, but the labor force is always constrained. And so the opportunity that we're bringing is we're basically providing the opportunity to expand the labor force and unlock that constraint on GDP growth. So if this goes as we think it could go, in the same way that with the Industrial Revolution, GDP went from, I think, like 0.2% to several percent, basically.
Correct.
We think it's not impossible that we unlock GDP growth so that it ends up being in the double digits going forward. Because now you have
massive.
It's just a huge impact to society. And so if you have a few years or a few decades of 10+% GDP growth, that's transformative for every human on the planet, right? That level of growth is just, if it's sustained. So I think that's really the opportunity that we bring, is by unlocking the constraint of labor, selling work, we really can open up growth. The nice side effect, of course, is that that allows us to sell this as a service, right? So there's a recurring revenue stream.
I always like coining new terms, listening to great entrepreneurs like you. Rhoda is pioneering labor as a service. If there is shortage of labor, if labor pool like capital doesn't get constrained, I'll get products to market faster.
Absolutely.
I will solve problems for my consumers, for my customers on a much faster basis.
Absolutely.
So sky's the limit.
Absolutely. It's truly, I mean, it's almost unreal to think about the potential impact.
Having been a stellar, serial, successful entrepreneur, S to the power of 3, what have been your key learnings, right? That you would be telling your younger self when you are starting your first company?
Yeah, one lesson I've learned is that I believe that all value is created when you're in one of the 4 quadrants you could be in relative to conventional versus unconventional approach and being wrong versus being right. So all the value is created when you're taking a contrarian approach. So you have to have people who are saying, this is never going to work, for there to be an opportunity to actually create value.
Otherwise, everybody would have solved it.
Exactly. So the lesson there is, when someone says this is never going to work, decouple the emotional feedback they're providing with the content they're providing, and look at the content and see if you agree or not. And if you don't agree with it, you can ignore it. And if you do agree, you can address the issues. Ignore the emotional part of whatever they're saying, because that's irrelevant. And just think for yourself. In the end, if you convince yourself the objections are not real, you can really take a shot and change the world.
Thank you again for giving us the opportunity to be working with you. It's been a delight and privilege, and looking forward to climbing Mount Everest together.
Navin, the pleasure has been all ours. Thanks for backing us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.